All right, Rain Man. How do you know this stuff?
Lecture at this year's TV Nostalgia Convention.
Still go to those?
Yeah, after the last one. Shambles.
Yeah. Nostalgia conventions aren't what they used to be.
Lee Majors is going to be at the next one.
$6 million man?
Apparently he's only worth 100 grand now. That's why he does the conventions.
Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and today I'm talking nostalgia, possibly. L.P. Hartley, The Go-Between. This book has one of the all-time famous opening lines. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. I like old books, I like old music, I like old films. That's probably not a surprise to anyone who has watched videos on my channel. I am, at time of recording, on the 99th book of my Read What You Own challenge to read 100 books. And I had a look at the list of those 99 books. Only 15 of them were written or published since I've been born. Of those 15, only 5 were published this century. And all of those books have a historical subject. There's one that's talking about Vermeer, one is talking about Magritte, one is talking about Jacob Fugger, one is talking about Kraftwerk, and I can't remember what the other one was. Oh yes, Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval England. So, not contemporary subjects. So, I read a lot of old stuff, but it wasn't always that way, and I began asking myself why. Now, the first reason I was asking myself why was utilitarian. I had nothing to talk about today, so this was a subject I picked. But it has been more at the forefront of my thoughts over the last month when I have been going through all of these old Miss Marple adaptations and some modern adaptations as well. But even those modern adaptations were, with one exception, recreating a past world. A fictionalized one, but still recognizably one from the 1940s, the 1950s. And having read the books, I could see that Agatha Christie herself was constantly looking back, using Miss Marple, a detective who is in the twilight of her years, using Marple as her mouthpiece, lamenting the advent of diesel trains and modern housing, mourning the passing of essentially her own youth. That is textbook nostalgia. And the textbooks have changed. Nostalgia as a term has been with us since the late 17th century. And it was initially a way of expressing a diagnosis of a very specific homesickness. Initially amongst Swiss mercenaries. Over time, that definition of nostalgia has eroded, ameliorated into a more general, wistful yearning, a bittersweet longing for a time that's past. But that doesn't explain why I like to read the books I read. I think possibly A little bit of that comes into it, but that is by no means the full story. A lot of what I am reading can't possibly qualify, and I don't think I want to return to something that I have previously experienced, my own lived experience. Trying to pigeonhole it all as nostalgia, I think, is more problematic, more confusing perhaps, when I think that my favourite subject, my favourite genre of fiction is science fiction. Science fiction is quite often forward looking, not exclusively, but it deals with things that may be happening in the future. But when I drill down to it, give me an old vintage paperback over the newest, shiniest release from the last month. So why is that? I started looking at the various different types of nostalgia and the issues that they have. One is the rosy recollection. Maybe the answer was somewhere in there. The past here, if you are wearing your rose-tinted spectacles, is usually presented in its best light, and there is usually an agreed narrative of the past. This isn't just in fiction. Look at the history section of any high street bookshop with new books. Certainly in the UK, look around the Waterstones history section. It is dominated by stories of World War II. For a country with such a long history, it's odd that we have glommed onto a foundational myth that begins in the 30s and the 40s. And the books on display certainly show how we like to present the narrative of that time to ourselves. Britain stood alone. That's the myth. We didn't. We were beneficiaries of all of the Lend-Lease support from the USA. We were backed up by a lot of the British Empire. Do not say Britain stood alone to the Polish fighters or the Free French, the Indians and the Chinese that were fighting alongside the British, Australians and the Americans against the Japanese in Burma. In America, the narrative is a bit more skewed towards how they were fighting alone in the Pacific, which they weren't entirely. It's about how they came to Europe and won that war, which is part of the story. But millions of Soviets might disagree. History is written by the victors, and there is a little bit of survivor bias in this narrative as well. You never hear stories of the Blitz spirit from the people who actually died in the Blitz. Even in our own less dramatic times, we will accentuate those positive memories. So I don't think I like reading stuff because of the rosy recollection. I credit myself with being able to see past some of these myths and these narratives. And I probably delude myself that I'm avoiding others which I am falling for, hook, line and sinker. But hopefully I don't have my rose-tinted spectacles permanently on. You will often hear the plaintive cry on this channel that a certain book was of its time. But I hope that doesn't mean that I am shying away from or excusing an issue with some of the books that I read, because the issues are there, and whilst there may be reasons, there's really not much of an excuse. A little bit of context helps, but I fully understand why other people would not care to read some of the works that I still enjoy. So it's not rosy recollection. What about nostalgia? This is, well, I don't like the word. It sounds a bit twee. And the yearning, even if yearning is the right word, is in falstalgia, something which is false in itself. Oddly enough, the word I think best sums it up is a neologism. It's from this century. It's anemoia. This is coined in what is now a book, but something which began, I believe, as a YouTube channel from the writer John Koenig and his Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And forgive the nostalgia, and this bit is actual nostalgia, but I find it funny that the writer is called John Koenig, when John Koenig is the character played by Martin Landau in Space 1999, which is one of those shows I still like to watch because of a feeling of nostalgia. Anemoia is the nostalgia for a time you have never known. With vintage science fiction, that's a mix of a future that never came to pass or never will come to pass, and the historical context of the time in which it was written. And that can include the production of the work, the romance of the pulp writers, or even just the anachronism that someone could earn a full-time wage just by writing. But going back to historical fiction, or returning to that idea of the narratives which we pump out around World War II, this becomes an imagination-based nostalgia. You are not remembering something. This is a nostalgia given to you. Why? Again, why? The question I keep asking myself. Well, I've got some subjects, some ideas here. They all begin with C. Comfort is the first. This nostalgia, this anemoia, can be a bulwark against the existential, debilitating anxiety of trying to deal with modern life. It harkens back to a time when things were, you are told, better. Certainty. This sort of leads on from that, and the fiction and the narratives certainly help here. Things were just more black and white, pigeonholed. There were definite good guys and definite bad guys. Canon. This is, the canon, not the shooty type canon. And a bit more of an intellectual rather than an emotional argument. But if you are reading the canon, the classics, you don't have to worry too much about your interpretation of new works. You have the certainty and the comfort that what you are reading is quality. And this isn't just about literature. This is the reason why we see so many movie franchise reboots of older works. Not only intellectually are you not having to make that distinction of discerning quality, but it also, for the studios, makes good business sense. And the fourth C word is comparison. You can escape into this parallel existence where these comforts, these certainties can soothe or bolster, and if you want, they can challenge you as well. Because the best of this writing subverts all of those comforting certainties that I've talked about, or at the very least is cognizant of the dangers that lie in nostalgia, the things that the reader must become vigilant against. Stagnation. Where will I get my new ideas from? Who will challenge the established orthodoxy? Idealization. Am I seeking something in this anemoic reading because I am dissatisfied with the modern life or just my life? And that leads on to dissatisfaction. If I end up believing that things were better back then, I might fall into the fallacy of wanting to make something great again, or taking back control. And such chocolate box depictions of an idyllic past can definitely present the wrong impression. Not only nostalgia for a time that you never experienced, but nostalgia for a time that never actually existed. I hope I don't often fall into these traps, and I think that reading science fiction helps because they are generally, in science fiction, alert to the dystopia that lies just underneath all of these ideas. But it's not just science fiction. You can make a much more intellectual argument by looking at post-colonialism or social realism in literature. Just maybe I'm overthinking it. That's happened before. Maybe it's just that is a stylistic certainty or a stylistic preference I have for modernism, for postmodernism, for pulp. Maybe that's something I can only find in older works, and trust me, it's scary to say that about postmodernism. Maybe, and this is the most prosaic and terrifying thought of them all, I'm just getting old. And if that's the case, then maybe I shall just stop fretting and enjoy it. I started this video with a quote, and I could finish with a quote, and I'll be mentioning a band I mentioned only last week. Jethro Tull. Oh, we won't give in. Let's go living in the past. Until next time.